The archaeologist's headlamp cut through 3,000 years of darkness. Valley of the Queens, Tomb 55, 2005. Her gloved fingers brushed limestone dust from the sarcophagus edge. The princess lay exactly as priests had positioned, her arms crossed over her chest, golden amulets still gleaming against linen wrappings. But something was wrong. Between the mummy's legs, where no burial goods should rest, two objects caught the light. An ivory phallus, a wooden phallus, both deliberately placed against the dead girl's thighs. The archaeologist jerked back. Her clipboard clattered on stone. These weren't burial mistakes. Ancient hands had arranged these objects with care, tucking them beneath the princess's funeral shroud like obscene gifts. The ivory piece bore hieroglyphs, prayers to ensure the dead girl's sexual service continued in the afterlife. The wooden phallus showed wear marks. Someone had used it, recently, on a mummy sealed for 3 millennia. This was a royal princess, daughter of Ramesses II. Her tomb paintings showed her at 14, offering flowers to the gods. Now those same gods demanded she spread her legs for eternity. The phalluses weren't anomalies. 4 more royal tombs yielded similar finds that year. Wooden penises, ivory penises, some inscribed with the names of specific gods who would use them. Some still wrapped in the linen that once covered dead princesses' genitals. The archaeological team stopped talking. In the tomb's silence, everyone understood. This wasn't tomb robbery. This was religious doctrine carved in wood and ivory. Egyptian paradise meant eternal rape, and priests, embalmers, believers had made sure these girls stayed ready. Forever. How does a civilization transform children's bodies into currency? How do creation myths become rape manuals? The answer starts with Egypt's most sacred story, the birth of existence itself. Every Egyptian child learned this tale. Gods masturbating the universe into being, divine semen creating rivers, celestial vaginas birthing the Sunday sex wasn't just how humans reproduced. Sex was how reality existed. Sound rippled through temple walls. Not prayer, not chanting. Something wet, something rhythmic. In the holiest shrine of Heliopolis, priests gathered around papyrus scrolls depicting the first sunrise, the creation of everything, and at the center of their circle, a young initiate learned why she'd been chosen. The universe began with masturbation. That's what Egyptian children memorized before they could write their names. The god Atum stood alone in primordial darkness, grasped his penis, and ejaculated existence into being. His semen became Shu, god of air. His pleasure became Tefnut, goddess of moisture. No subtle metaphors, no poetic interpretation. The hieroglyphs showed a god's hand on his erection, spurting divine fluid that transformed into deities. Priests taught this story with anatomical precision. They used ivory models. They pointed to temple carvings where Atum's penis stretched larger than his body. They explained how his orgasm split into the first male and female principles, how those principles then mated to produce the earth and sky, how the earth and sky fornicated to birth the remaining gods. Creation meant sex. Sex meant creation. The two concepts fused into religious law. But if gods could mate with siblings, what about pharaohs? The answer decorated every temple wall. Osiris penetrating his sister Isis, their son Horus later marrying his mother, Set sodomizing his nephew. The Ennead of Heliopolis read like an incest manual, complete with illustrated positions. Priests didn't hide these images. They carved them in gold. They painted them on sarcophagi. They taught children to recite the names of divine couples who shared wombs before they shared beds. The pyramid texts made it explicit. Your sister Isis comes to you rejoicing for love of you. You have placed her on your phallus, and your seed issues into her. Not metaphor, not symbolism. A god ejaculating into his sister's vagina, described in the same clinical detail as a medical papyrus. The text continued, "She has borne Horus for you. Divine incest produced divine kings." The logic was inescapable. Pharaohs claimed direct descent from these incestuous unions. Their blood carried Horus's essence. Their bodies channeled divine sexuality. When they coupled with their sisters, they weren't committing crimes. They were reenacting creation. When they impregnated their daughters, They mirrored the gods. Royal incest became religious duty. The priests had found their justification. Old Kingdom texts preserve the first sacred rapes, not hidden in shame, celebrated in stone. The cannibal hymn from Unis's pyramid describes the pharaoh consuming goddesses through their vaginas. He has swallowed their magic. He has gulped down their powers. The hieroglyphs show a king's mouth between spread divine legs. This wasn't aberration. This was orthodoxy. Pepi II formalized the practice. His pyramid texts command, "The king's phallus is between the legs of the Great One." Which Great One? Any female deity the priests designated. Any woman who embodied that deity. Any child who wore the goddess's mask during festivals. The king's penis became a religious instrument. His orgasm recreated universal birth. Temple schools taught these texts to 6-year-olds. Children memorized which gods raped which goddesses. They learned that Min's permanent erection maintained cosmic order, that Bess's grotesque penis warded off evil, that divine semen flowing through human wombs produced blessed offspring. They watched priests reenact creation through ritual masturbation. They understood their bodies belonged to this system. What happened next would echo for millennia. The first documented victim remains nameless. Pyramid texts identify her only as she who belongs to the house of Ra, 9 years old, maybe 10. Her father, a 5th dynasty pharaoh, decided to test divine precedent. If Atum could create through masturbation, if Osiris could impregnate his sister, surely a living god could sanctify his daughter's womb. Priests prepared the ritual. They shaved the girl's head. They painted her skin gold. They dressed her in transparent linen that revealed the body beneath. They gave her lotus wine mixed with mandrake enough to stop her screams, but not her consciousness. The pharaoh needed her awake. The gods demanded witness to their reenactment. The ceremony took place at sunrise. Just as Atum's orgasm created the first dawn, the pharaoh would mirror creation inside his daughter. Priests chanted the source texts. They burned myrrh. They held the girl's arms while her father positioned himself. The hieroglyphic record stops there. But 9 months later, palace texts mention a divine birth, a blessed child, a baby whose existence proved the pharaoh's godhood. The tradition spread like infection. Middle Kingdom pharaohs married daughters openly. New Kingdom rulers collected sister wives. By the Ptolemaic period, royal incest wasn't scandal, it was succession planning. Cleopatra VII married 2 brothers. Royal wombs became theological proving grounds. Royal hymens became sacrificial altars. But the gods demanded more than royal flesh. Every Egyptian participated in divine creation through sex. Every orgasm echoed Atum's first ejaculation. Every penetration recreated universal birth. The implications poisoned 3,000 years of human relations. Sex became sacrament. Consent became blasphemy. Children's bodies became offerings to ensure cosmic continuation. And when the first pharaoh decided to test this divine precedent with his own daughter, he created a tradition that would break the genetic code of Egypt's rulers, starting with a 9-year-old girl whose name was erased from history. The papyrus simply states, "His Majesty knew his daughter in her 9th year, and she bore him a son." No metaphor, no poetic language, just administrative record-keeping of a pharaoh raping his child. The scribe who wrote it used the same matter-of-fact tone he'd use for grain inventory. 14 bushels of wheat, 3 jars of oil, 1 royal pregnancy by incest. The papyrus crackles in museum storage, its casual horror preserved for 3,000 years. Princess Sitamun was 8 when her father first noticed her. Amenhotep III, builder of temples, conqueror of Nubia, decided his daughter's body would prove his divinity. The court knew. The queen knew. Artists carved commemorative scarabs celebrating the union. They used the same word for marriage. Union. As if an 8-year-old could consent to union with the 60-year-old man who created her. The pregnancy announcement came with fanfare. Royal birth chambers prepared. Midwives summoned. Wet nurses interviewed. The palace pretended normalcy while a 9-year-old girl's belly swelled with her father's child. Courtiers composed hymns about divine bloodlines. Priests explained how this mirrored Osiris and Isis. The girl probably still played with dolls between prenatal examinations. But childbirth at 9 destroys bodies. Pelvises haven't widened. Birth canals can't stretch enough. The medical papyri describe emergency procedures for young mothers, meaning children forced to deliver their father's babies. Sitamun survived. Others didn't. Their mummies show pelvic fractures, torn tissue, hemorrhage patterns, deaths blamed on divine will rather than child rape. The baby arrived malformed. Palace records mention a blessed child who returned to the gods after 3 days. Temple walls show Sitamun offering flowers to her divine infant. Artists gave the dead baby a perfect body and paint, while its actual corpse probably couldn't breathe through collapsed airways. Genetic devastation, hidden under golden rhetoric. Sitamun bore her father at least 2 more children. By 14, she was queen wife. By 20, she was competing with her own daughters for her father's bed. The cycle normalized into palace routine. Morning, offerings to Amun. Afternoon, administrative duties. Evening, the pharaoh chose which daughter to sanctify with his seed. Night, children's bodies broke under divine privilege. The club foot was just the beginning. Tutankhamun could barely walk. His mummy revealed a twisted spine, malformed skull, cleft palate, and that famous club foot that required special sandals. But tourist guides skip the cause. They mention his golden mask, his pristine tomb, his place in history. They don't explain that his deformities came from his parents being full siblings. Brother-sister marriage, producing a boy whose DNA screamed its objection to existence. The tests came back in 2010. Geneticists expecting normal royal intermarriage found a nightmare of compressed bloodlines. Tutankhamun's parents shared the same mother and father. His grandparents on both sides were the same people. His family tree was a circle. Every cell in his body carried doubled copies of harmful recessive genes. He lived 19 years of compounding genetic catastrophe. His wife was his half-sister. Their 2 daughters were born dead, mummified at 7 and 9 months gestation. Tiny bodies wrapped in linen, buried in miniature coffins. The fetuses show skeletal abnormalities consistent with extreme inbreeding. Spines that couldn't straighten, hearts that couldn't beat. Royal blood so pure it poisoned itself. But Tutankhamun's deformities pale compared to what archaeologists found next. The Amarna royal tomb held bodies that shouldn't exist. Skeletal remains showing deformities beyond medical explanation. Skulls elongated not by head binding but by genetic mutation. Jaws that couldn't close. Eye sockets at wrong angles. These were Akhenaten's children, or attempts at children, products of unions between fathers and daughters, brothers and sisters, uncles and nieces. A royal family tree collapsing into a single trunk. Princess Meketaten died at 12, probably in childbirth. Her tomb shows her on a birthing bed while her father Akhenaten mourns. Some scholars call it plague death. Others admit the obvious. The king impregnated his prepubescent daughter. The birth scene includes a nurse carrying away an infant, another royal baby dead from genetic overload, another child sacrificed to divine bloodline purity. The practice spread through noble families. If pharaohs proved godhood through incest, elite families could approach divinity the same way. Brother-sister marriages appeared in Middle Kingdom contracts. Father-daughter unions left paper trails in inheritance documents. The Ptolemaic census records entire neighborhoods where uncles married nieces, where cousins shared beds and bloodlines. Genetic diversity vanished into theological mandate. Physical evidence accumulates in museum storage. Mummies with Habsburg jaws before Habsburgs existed. Skeletal remains showing dwarfism clusters in royal bloodlines. Brain cases too small for normal function. The golden masks and painted sarcophagi hid a parade of human wreckage. Each deformed prince and princess proof that God's ways were not meant for human bodies. But royalty displayed their broken children as divine favor. Crown Prince Amenemhab's spine curved so badly he couldn't stand upright. Palace art shows him seated, always seated, receiving tribute. Princess Neferu's skull extended backward like an alien's. Her portraits gave her a tall crown to disguise the deformity. They paraded these damaged children as blessed beings. closer to gods because their bodies rejected human form. The child's laughter echoed through halls built on genetic catastrophe. A limestone ostracon preserves one victim's voice. Princess Nefertiti's daughter, name carefully erased, wrote to her aunt, "He visits my chamber when mother attends the lesser wives. I tell him my belly hurts. He says the gods require it. The baby stopped moving yesterday. The doctors say this is the third that will die inside me. I am 13. The aunt never responded, or her response wasn't preserved. The niece disappears from records after this letter. Another royal womb destroyed by divine mandate. Another bloodline collapsing under its own purity. But the system demanded fresh victims. If royal wombs failed, common ones would serve. Temple prostitutes, they called them sacred women, came from families too poor to refuse. Some were pledged as infants, raised knowing their hymens would be temple property. Others were widows with no protection, daughters sold to pay debts, or just pretty children who caught a priest's eye during festivals. The gods needed vessels. Commerce needed funding. The two requirements merged into systematic exploitation. But temple prostitution was just the beginning. The real money came from something worse, something that would turn Egyptian religion into an international sex trafficking network. If royal incest produced broken bodies hidden by gold, imagine what happened when commoners' daughters caught the eye of priests claiming to channel the gods themselves. They lined up naked, hundreds of girls, some clutching dolls, while priests examined their teeth like livestock. The selection ground stretched across the temple of Karnak's outer courtyard. Dawn light caught on gooseflesh as children shivered in morning air. Mothers wailed from behind wooden barriers. Guards kept them back with spears. The youngest stood barely hip-high to the priests, 4 years old, maybe 5, old enough to walk steadily but young enough to bring stuffed crocodiles for comfort. They didn't understand why strangers circled them, why holy men grabbed their chins and forced their mouths open, why their mothers screamed from beyond the fence. The priests moved with practiced efficiency. They checked teeth first, then hair texture, skin clarity, breast development or its absence, between the legs for any sign of imperfection. They made notes on papyrus. Perfect specimens received lotus marks. Flawed ones got dismissed with ankle kicks. A crooked tooth could save your life. That's what mothers whispered in preparation weeks. They fed daughters honeyed nuts, hoping cavities would form. They accidentally let children fall, praying for chipped incisors. Some went further. Kitchen knives slipped during face washing. Cooking oil splashed too close to cheeks. Anything to mark their girls as unworthy of divine selection. The priests knew. They brought silver picks to test for false cavities. They scraped at scars to check healing patterns. Fresh wounds meant deliberate damage. Families who mutilated daughters faced execution. The gods demanded perfect vessels, and parents who denied them committed blasphemy. But perfection meant something worse than death. The chosen girls received white linen shifts, gold anklets that chimed when they walked, lotus flowers for their hair. Priests proclaimed their blessed status, while scribes recorded names and villages. The selected would become God's wives, divine concubines, sacred vessels for celestial seed. The families had 3 days. 3 days to visit their perfect daughters. 3 days to bring favorite foods and final toys. 3 days to pretend the temple dormitories were anything but decorated prisons. Guards allowed supervised meetings in courtyards where other chosen girls played silent games. Nobody spoke about what happened after training ended. Some parents broke. A papyrus from Deir el-Medina records a father's plea. She still wets her sleeping mat. She calls for me in darkness. How can the god want someone who needs her wooden duck to sleep? The priest responded that childishness made vessels pure. The god preferred innocence. The father's second letter mentions his arrest for temple theft. He'd tried to steal his daughter back. The underground network called them lotus seekers. Families who'd lost daughters to the temples shared warning codes. When priests entered villages for collection, runners spread word. Lotus seekers in the eastern district. Parents hid daughters in grain storage, rubbed dirt in their hair, fed them spoiled milk to induce temporary illness. But the gods' appetites grew with each dynasty. What started as dozens became hundreds. Annual collections turned seasonal. Age requirements dropped from 14 to 12 to 10 to whenever girls could walk steadily. The Temple of Mut alone housed 300 sacred wives by the Middle Kingdom, fresh selections every spring, fresh victims every harvest. The training lasted 6 months. Girls learned to dance with weighted hip scarves, to play sistrums in rhythm with their swaying, to recite prayers while hands roamed their bodies. They practiced with ivory phalluses blessed by high priests. The smallest ones, sized for children, bore names like Gentle Introducer and First Friend. Trainers were older sacred wives, women who'd survived their initial years through luck or infertility. They taught practical skills, how to relax certain muscles to minimize tearing, which herbs prevented pregnancy, where to bite your lip so screams sounded like pleasure, how to dissociate while maintaining eye contact, survival tactics dressed as religious education. Not all graduated. The dormitory records list causes of death with bureaucratic detachment. Return to the goddess meant suicide. Blessed by early union meant a priest couldn't wait for training to finish. Consumed by divine fever covered everything from pregnancy complications to violent clients who paid extra for enthusiasm. The graduation ceremony took place at sunset. New gods' wives received their full regalia. Transparent gowns that concealed nothing, jeweled collars marking them as divine property, perfumed oils that couldn't mask the smell of fear. They stood before the temple's great doors while families watched from designated areas, close enough to see their daughters' faces, too far to reach them. The doors opened. Incense billowed out like reaching fingers. The girls walked forward in trained unison, hip scarves chiming, sistrum music covering any sounds of distress. Once inside, they belonged to the temple, to the priests, to anyone who paid the gods' servants for divine union. Their families received compensation, grain allotments, tax exemptions, the promise that their daughters' service funded temple construction and pleased heaven. Some parents spent the payment quickly, as if coin could wash away complicity. Others hoarded it, saving for the day their girls might return. Most sacred wives didn't survive 10 years of service. Those who did emerged hollow-eyed and sterile, their bodies used up by divine appetite. But one girl's perfection would doom her to something worse than standard temple service. Ankhesen-Amun stood out during her selection at 14. Not just beautiful, not just poised. She moved with natural grace that caught the high priest's attention. Her medical examination revealed an intact hymen despite her age. Her bloodline traced to Middle Kingdom royalty, the perfect offering for the most sacred ritual. The divine marriage happened once per decade. A virgin of exceptional quality united with the god himself, channeled through his earthly representative. Not in private temple chambers but before thousands of witnesses. A public sacrament, a blessed spectacle. A teenage girl's rape disguised as cosmic theatre. At dawn on the 4th day, these chosen girls would enter temples they'd never leave alive. The morning of Ankhesen's divine marriage, 2,000 citizens gathered in the temple of Amun's great court. Priests sold viewing spots. Vendors hawked blessed amulets. Musicians played celebratory hymns. The crowd buzzed with anticipation for the sacred performance. Beginning with Ankhesen-Amun, whose first divine marriage at 14 was witnessed by thousands. The crowd roared approval as the 14-year-old princess climbed the temple steps, her thin linen dress already transparent with sacred oils. 2,000 faces turned upward to watch. Merchants abandoned their stalls. Mothers lifted children onto shoulders. The high priest of Amun waited at the altar, his shaved head glistening with sweat that had nothing to do with noon heat. Ankhesen-Amun moved like she'd been trained, each step deliberate, each gesture practiced. The gold hip chain around her waist chimed with her movement. 30 pounds of jewelry draped her child's frame. Collar, bracelets, anklets, all donated by citizens who believed their offerings would guarantee divine favor. The metal caught sunlight and threw it back at the crowd in blinding flashes. Behind her, 12 priestesses shook sistrums in synchronized rhythm. The metallic rattle echoed off limestone walls. It covered the sound of Ankhesen's breathing. Quick, shallow. The breathing of prey that knows it cannot run. The altar stood 20 feet high, black granite imported from Aswan, carved with images of Amun-Ra penetrating goddesses. The crowd could see every detail from their positions below. They'd paid for those positions. Prime viewing spots near the altar base cost a month's wages. Even the poor scraped together copper pieces for standing room. Everyone wanted to witness divinity made flesh. The high priest raised his arms. Silence fell like a blade. 2,000 people held their breath. In that quiet, everyone could hear the oil dripping from Anchisen's dress onto stone, each drop a tiny explosion in the stillness. "Behold the vessel of Amun-Ra," the priest's voice carried across the courtyard without effort. Years of practice had taught him exactly how to project. She comes pure to receive the god's essence. Through her holy womb, the divine seed shall bless our land with fertility. The crowd erupted. Women ululated, men stamped their feet. Children who didn't understand threw flower petals their parents had bought from temple vendors. The noise crashed over Anchisen like a physical force. She swayed. A priestess steadied her with a hand between her shoulder blades. "Keep moving. Don't stop. The god is waiting." The priest's shaved head glistened as he approached. Not just sweat now. Sacred oils that made his skin shine like polished wood. He'd fasted for 3 days to purify himself as Ammon's vessel, drunk only lotus wine to elevate his consciousness, chewed mandrake root to ensure his body would perform its divine function. His pupils had swollen until his eyes looked black. He circled Anchisen slowly. The crowd tracked his movement. He touched her hair, letting the dark strands run through his fingers. He pressed his palm against her forehead, her throat, her chest. Each touch drew cheers from below. The god was examining his offering, finding her worthy. "Remove the earthly veil," he commanded. The priestesses stepped forward. Their hands worked in practiced unison, unpinning the golden clasps that held Anchisen's dress. The linen fell away like water. Underneath, only jewelry and skin. 14 years old, hip bones sharp beneath gold chains, breasts barely developed despite the oils meant to enhance them. The crowd roared approval at her nudity, divine beauty, sacred flesh. No one mentioned she had the body of a child. The altar's surface had been carved with channels. Not for blood, this wasn't that kind of sacrifice. For other fluids. The priests had thought of everything. Anchisen lay back against the stone. The granite felt cold despite the Sunday, cold and hard and ancient. How many girls had pressed their spines against this same surface? How many had stared up at this same sky while the god took his due? The priest positioned himself with theatrical precision, every movement visible to the crowd. They needed to see the moment of penetration, the moment God entered flesh, the moment divine met mortal. Anything less would be theological failure. What the crowd saw as divine ecstasy was actually a child dissociating. Anchisen's eyes went somewhere else, somewhere beyond the blue sky and circling birds. Her body remained on the altar, but her mind fled to whatever sanctuary 14-year-olds find when their bodies are no longer their own. The crowd saw her stillness as holy acceptance. They saw her silence as divine communion. They saw what they needed to see. The priest moved with violent purpose. This wasn't lovemaking. This was theology. Each thrust represented Amun, Ra's cosmic power. Each impact against her child's body proved the god's virility. The crowd counted strokes. They'd bet on duration. How long could the god maintain his earthly form? How many times could divinity penetrate mortality before spending itself? Someone started a chant. Amun-Ra, life-giver. Amun-Ra, seed-bringer. 2,000 voices picked it up. The rhythm matched the priest's movements. The entire courtyard pulsed with synchronized violence. Parents lifted children higher to see better. Vendors sold commemorative amulets carved with coupling figures. A festival atmosphere while a teenager's body broke against stone. The blood appeared after 20 strokes. Just a trickle at first, running down the altar channels the builders had so thoughtfully included. The crowd cheered louder. Divine approval. The god's vigor had broken through mortal limitation. Blessed be the bleeding virgin. The blood on the altar was celebrated as divine approval. Priests rushed forward with collection vessels. Every drop was sacred. Mixed with wine, it would be sold as fertility medicine. Mixed with oil, it would anoint doorways. Mixed with water, it would bless fields. Anchisen's blood became commodity before it finished flowing. The priest climaxed with a roar that echoed across the courtyard. The crowd erupted in celebration. He pulled away from Anchisen's still form, his organ glistening with blood and divine purpose. Priests helped him stand. The god's possession had left him weak. They wrapped him in white linen while the crowd sang hymns of praise. Anchisen didn't move, couldn't move. The priestesses approached with healing oils and bandages. They'd done this before. They knew which herbs stopped bleeding, which positions prevented shock, which words to whisper when girls begged for death. They worked quickly, professionally, while 2,000 people celebrated below. The high priestess raised a crimson cloth. The god has been received. The vessel has proven worthy. Let all Egypt rejoice in this divine union. More cheers, more songs, more flowers thrown at the altar, where a 14-year-old girl lay broken and bleeding. The crowd began to disperse, chattering about the spectacle they'd witnessed. Some headed to beer halls to toast the god's performance. Others rushed to brothels, inspired by divine example. A few lingered to watch the priestesses carry Anchisen away on a litter. Her eyes stayed fixed on nothing. Her hands clutched at air. The medical papyrus records her injuries with clinical precision. Vaginal tearing requiring 40 stitches. Bruised cervix. 3 cracked ribs from the altar's pressure. Internal bleeding that lasted 6 days. The priests proclaimed each wound divine blessing. Each scar proved the god's presence. Anchisen survived because she was young and strong and lucky. The medical texts mention she never spoke again. Selective mutism, we'd call it now. The priests called it holy silence. But surviving one divine marriage didn't grant reprieve. The god's appetite required regular feeding. Special occasions demanded special sacrifices. Royal birthdays, military victories, good harvests. Any excuse to drag another girl up those temple steps while crowds cheered and vendors sold snacks and children watched their futures unfold in theological horror. The anniversary performances were worst. Each year, previous vessels were brought back to renew their divine connections. Anchisen endured 4 more public rituals before her body finally gave out. The last one, witnessed by 3,000 celebrants, left her hemorrhaging too badly for herbs to heal. She died at 19, on the same altar where she'd been broken at 14. The priests proclaimed her ascension to divine queenship. The crowd cheered her blessed transition. Another successful theological performance. But Anchisen survived her ordeal. Unlike the 300 girls whose names were carved into Karnak's temple walls, each entry ending with a single hieroglyph that meant ascended. The inscription reads like an inventory list. Nefertiti, age 9, received by Amenhotep, 3rd prophet, status ascended. The papyrus crackles between gloved fingers. Each name meticulously recorded, each girl reduced to hieroglyphic notation. The scribe who carved these records used the same precise strokes for human souls as grain receipts. Karnak's secret archive spreads across 3 rooms. Shelves of ceramic tablets, rolls of papyrus, limestone shards covered in hurried notes. Every surface documents the same transaction. Young girls enter. The god receives them. They ascend. Over and over. 300 names in this collection alone. The handwriting changes every few years. Different scribes, same formula. The girl's name, her age, the priest who performed the ritual, the outcome. Always that same hieroglyph at the end. A bird flying upward. Ascended. Such a gentle word for what archaeology reveals. Dr. Hassan adjusts the CT scanner. The mummy inside is small. Too small. The tag identifies her as Temple Servant 743. No name preserved, just a number. The machine hums to life. Images appear on the screen. Bone density, organ placement, pelvic structure. The doctor stops. His coffee mug hits the floor. The pelvis is shattered. Not broken. Shattered. Like someone took a hammer to ceramic. The sacrum split in 3 places. The pubic symphysis completely separated. Damage that could only come from extreme force against a body too small to accommodate it. The scanner reveals more. Hemorrhaging patterns preserved in desiccated tissue. Massive internal bleeding. Death would have taken hours. She was 8 years old. The youngest name on the list was barely readable. Someone had tried to erase it, scratched at the limestone. But infrared photography reveals what guilty hands wanted hidden. TIU, 4 years old. The space for priest's name shows similar scratching. Even monsters had limits. Even they felt shame, but not enough to stop. More scans, more shattered pelvises, more hemorrhaging patterns, more children whose ascension meant bleeding to death on temple floors. The medical evidence accumulates in digital files. Each scan a testimony, each fracture an accusation, each tiny skeleton proof that sacred union meant child rape so violent it split bone. But some records are different. Longer entries, multiple ceremonies, the same girl's name appearing across years. These survivors endured repeated ascensions. Their bodies somehow accommodated what killed others. They lived to serve again, and again, and again. Papyrus Brooklyn 3574. 4 preserves one survivor's career. Merit started at 11. The record lists 17 ceremonies across 6 years. Different priests each time. The fees increased with each survival. A girl who could endure divine union repeatedly became valuable. Premium commodity. Her final entry notes, retired to beer house. 17 years old. Used up. Discarded to whatever work-broken teenagers could manage. The fees tell their own story. Early dynasty records show modest payments, a jar of oil, some grain, token acknowledgements, but demand grew, prices rose. By the New Kingdom, deflowering a temple virgin cost more than a house. The archive preserves contracts, negotiated rates, quantity discounts for multiple girls, payment plans for those who couldn't afford divinity up front. One papyrus details a merchant's arrangement. 3 daughters, ages 7, 9, and 12. Volume discount applied. The older 2 for immediate ceremony. The youngest held in reserve, ceremony scheduled for her 9th birthday. The merchant paid in copper ingots. The receipt specifies no refunds for ascension. Modern CT scans revealed what ascended really meant. The euphemism covered industrial murder. 300 names at Karnak alone. How many other temples? How many other archives? How many small bodies wrapped in linen, their shattered pelvises testament to theological atrocity? Dr. Hassan's team excavated the temple's eastern cemetery. Tiny mummies in unmarked pits. No gold, no jewelry, no identification except numerical tags. The temple's waste disposal. Girls who ascended, dumped like broken pottery. The team stopped counting at 50. The ground-penetrating radar showed hundreds more. But the records revealed something worse than death tolls. They showed methodology, training manuals for priests, techniques to minimize visible damage, herbs to stop screaming, positions that reduced immediate fatality. They wanted the girls to survive initial penetration. Dead virgins brought single payments. Living ones could be used repeatedly. The instruction texts read like torture manuals. For vessels under 10 years, employ oil of bitter almond to induce pliancy. Should bleeding exceed acceptable parameters, pack with natron and linen. Divine union should last precisely 100 heartbeats to balance theological necessity with vessel preservation. One priest participated in 47 ceremonies. His name appears across decades. Amenhotep, 3rd prophet of Karnak. The records note his specialty. Very young vessels. Girls others considered too small. He developed techniques, wrote instructional texts, trained other priests in his methods. A serial child rapist elevated to theological expert. His personal archive survived in a sealed jar. Private notes, observations, favorites. He rated girls like wine vintages. This one's terror enhanced the experience. That one's silence proved divine acceptance. He recorded physical details. Birthmarks, screams, how long each took to stop moving. Monster's diary dressed as religious documentation. One entry stands out. A failed ceremony. The girl, 6 years old, went into shock immediately, died before completion. The priest's frustration fills 3 pages. Theological failure. Divine rejection. He blamed the girl's impurity. Her terror had offended the god. Next time he would ensure better preparation. More lotus wine. Stronger restraints. Anything to complete the sacred act. These dead children were the lucky ones because those who survived their divine unions faced decades of sexual servitude that funded Egypt's golden age. 12,000 clay tokens scattered across the excavated temple floor, each one the size of a child's thumb, each one stamped with a lotus and a number. The archaeologists thought they'd found ancient currency until they translated the accompanying ledger. These weren't coins, they were receipts, proof of purchase, proof of use. 12,000 transactions between priests and flesh. The papyrus ledger survived 3 millennia in a sealed jar. Water damage obscured some entries, but the pattern was clear. Token number, girl's name, service provided, payment received. The scribe recorded everything with the same precision as temple grain stores. Wheat from the northern fields, beer from the eastern breweries, women from the sacred dormitories. Token 47 corresponded to Nefertami, age 16. 3 clients in one day. The payment column showed silver equal to a month's wages for a skilled craftsman. Token 312 marked Tuya, age 14. Special services. The price tripled. The ledger didn't specify what made services special. Other documents would reveal that horrible clarity. The money flowed like the Nile in flood season. Temple prostitution generated more revenue than all other sources combined. More than harvest tithes, more than funeral rites, more than statue commissions. The flesh trade built those golden walls tourists photograph. Every hieroglyph, every carved relief, every sheet of gold hammering, paid for by girls whose names filled ledger after ledger. One entry stops the breath. A single day's receipts during the Opet festival. 400 tokens issued. 400 women and girls servicing pilgrims who came to honor the gods. The temple employed scribes just to track the flow. This client wanted a virgin. That one paid extra for a mother-daughter pair. Another requested the youngest available. All recorded, all priced, all delivered. The archaeological team found the dormitories behind the main temple. Small cells carved from limestone, each one barely large enough for a sleeping mat. No windows, no decoration. Just hooks in the walls where clothing might hang, and shallow depressions worn in the floor. Depressions shaped like human bodies. Places where countless girls had curled into themselves night after night, year after year. But the worst discovery came from the medical papyri. Instructions for temple prostitutes. How to prevent pregnancy with crocodile dung pessaries. How to induce miscarriage with silphium extract. How to heal after violent clients. The texts read like survival manuals written by and for the desperate. Women teaching girls how to endure the unendurable. Between the medical instructions, someone had pressed flower petals. Lotus blooms preserved between papyrus sheets. A small rebellion. A tiny beauty in systematic horror. Some girl collecting flowers between clients, pressing them carefully, creating something lovely in a life stripped of loveliness. The petals crumbled at modern touch, but their shadows remain. Ghost flowers. Ghost hope. The busiest times matched religious festivals. Thousands of pilgrims meant thousands of customers. The temples hired extra security, not to protect the women, to manage the lines. Men waited hours for their turn at divine union. They drank beer sold by temple vendors. They placed bets on which girls would last the longest. They treated gang rape like entertainment. One papyrus preserves a prostitute's work schedule during the festival of Min. Dawn prayers. Then 23 clients before noon. Brief break for bread and beer. 31 more before sunset. Evening purification ritual. Then the night shift. Private chambers for those who paid premium rates. The girl's name was Merit Amun. The schedule notes she collapsed during the night shift, resumed service the next morning. The temple took 60% of earnings. The rest went to basic survival. Food cost extra. Clean water cost extra. Medical treatment for inevitable injuries cost extra. Most girls ended up owing the temple money. Debt bondage on top of sexual slavery. They couldn't leave because they couldn't afford to leave. The system trapped them as efficiently as any chain. Some tried escape. The punishment texts describe what happened to runners. Public flogging first, then facial branding, then assignment to the soldier barracks where discipline was rougher and payment non-existent. The brands marked them as temple property. Even if they ran again, everyone would know where they belonged, who they belonged to. But the real profit came from something even more valuable than daily prostitution. Virgin auctions brought noble families from across Egypt. They bid on first rights to the newest acquisitions, girls fresh from their villages, still believing the lies about divine service. The auctions happened monthly. The temples advertised in advance. Fresh flowers, they called them, ready for plucking. Tawaret was 13 when the priests took her from her village. Her parents had pledged her to secure a good harvest. She arrived at the temple of Hathor, still wearing the wooden amulet her grandmother carved. The priests stripped her, oiled her, and presented her to the bidding crowd. The winner paid equivalent to 2 years' income. The temple made more from one virgin auction than a month of regular service. The deflowering happened publicly, not as elaborate as divine marriage ceremonies, but still witnessed. The temples built special chambers with viewing galleries. Witnesses ensured authenticity. No one could claim they hadn't received what they paid for. The girls' screams echoed off limestone walls while scribes recorded successful transactions. After deflowering, girls joined the general population. Their value dropped, but demand remained steady. Soldiers on leave, merchants concluding deals, farmers celebrating harvest. Anyone with copper could purchase divinity between female legs. The steady flow of common customers provided the temple's daily bread. The virgin auctions bought the gold. Some women survived decades in temple service. The lucky ones aged into madams, managing younger girls, teaching them tricks, holding them after brutal nights, creating tiny pockets of care in systematic cruelty. But most didn't last 5 years. Disease, pregnancy complications, violent clients, suicide. The temples burned through women, like oil lamps burned through fuel. The records show attempts at organization, prostitutes pooling resources to buy medicine, sharing food with sick sisters, warning each other about dangerous clients. Small acts of solidarity that couldn't change the system but made it barely survivable. They carved messages into cell walls, names, dates, prayers, curses, proof they existed beyond ledger entries. The Bubastis excavation found one cell covered in scratched writing, hundreds of names, maybe thousands. Women recording themselves and their sisters. Tuya lived here. Merit Amun survived 8 years. Nefertiti died in childbirth, age 15. Layer after layer. Centuries of women insisting on being remembered as more than commodity. Between the names, someone had carved a letter. The stone preserved her words for 3,000 years. Mother, my heart hardens like granite. Each dawn brings 50 more. I no longer bleed. I no longer cry. The priests say I'm blessed, beloved of the gods. I think the gods fled this place long ago. If you receive this, know your daughter died the day she entered these walls. What walks here is something else. Something that learned to survive by stopping being human. No signature. But the carving style matched other messages from the late period. Some priest's daughter pledged to temple service, watching her humanity dissolve transaction by transaction. Her letter, the only testimony to internal death that preceded physical death. A soul fossilizing in real time. The money from all this suffering funded Egypt's greatest architectural achievements. The Temple of Karnak, the Luxor complex, the Ramesseum, every stone mortared with women's blood, every golden statue cast from their degradation. Tourists take selfies against walls built by industrial rape. They admire the architectural genius, the artistic achievement, the cultural legacy. No one mentions the receipts, the tokens, the cells, the names carved by desperate hands. But even death offered no escape, because Egyptian priests had plans for female bodies that extended into eternity itself. The family paid extra gold to keep their daughter's corpse at home for 3 days. Not for mourning, not for prayers, for decomposition. They wanted her beautiful face to bloat and discolor before the embalmers arrived. Everyone knew what happened in the houses of the dead. Herodotus wrote it first. 2,400 years ago, the Greek historian toured Egypt's embalming facilities. His local guides spoke freely after wine. Beautiful corpses, they warned, should never arrive fresh. The embalmers had appetites that nature and salt couldn't preserve. Wait 3 days. Let nature uglify what death made vulnerable. Then deliver your daughters to the rapt hands of the priests. The papyrus records don't mention it. The tomb paintings show only dignity. Anubis guiding souls, Osiris weighing hearts, sacred rituals of preservation. But in 2005, Connecticut scanners revealed what 3 millennia of silence had hidden. 23% of female mummies from the New Kingdom showed signs of postmortem vaginal trauma. Nearly 1 in 4. The damage patterns were specific. Tearing that occurred after blood stopped flowing. Positioning inconsistent with mummification procedures. Penetration marks on bodies that should have been immediately wrapped. The scanning team in Cairo stopped publishing after the 3rd report. Too controversial. Too damaging to Egypt's image. But the evidence glowed on their screens. Corpse after corpse, bearing signatures of violation. The embalming houses operated like factories. Bodies arrived hourly during plague seasons. The workers, all male by religious law, processed flesh with mechanical efficiency. Remove the brain through the nose. Extract organs through abdominal incisions. Pack cavities with natron. Wrap in resin-soaked linen. Standard procedure took 70 days. But beautiful female corpses often took longer. One papyrus from Deir el-Medina preserves an embalmer's confession, written in shaking hieratic script, found buried beneath his workshop floor. I have sinned against the daughters of nobles. My hands that should prepare them for eternity have stolen their journey. 17 I have known after their breath ceased. The youngest still wore the flowers from her funeral. I cannot stop. The flesh calls to me. May the crocodile devour my soul. He drowned himself in the Nile 3 days later. His workers found the confession while preparing his workshop for a new master. They burned the papyrus, but someone copied it first. Someone wanted the words preserved. Evidence, warning, truth too terrible for silence. The beautiful ones suffered most. Young women, teenage girls, children whose beauty survived death's first touch. Embalmers paid bribes to morgue workers. Send us the pretty ones. We'll make it worth your while. A network of flesh traders dealing in corpses. The families never knew. Their daughters arrived at the afterlife, violated by the very priests who promised eternal preservation. The workshop layouts tell their own story. Main embalming halls for standard processing, but archaeologists found secondary chambers, smaller rooms, private spaces, tables at hip height, restraint marks on the walls. These weren't for mummification. The natron stains showed where bodies had been positioned, always female, always young. Some embalmers specialized, built reputations. This one preserved beauty exceptionally well. That one worked only with virgin corpses. Families paid premium rates, never knowing they funded their daughter's defilement. The more beautiful the corpse, the higher the price. The longer the process, the more opportunities for violation. The evidence multiplied with better scanning technology. Microfractures in pelvic bones, tissue damage in preserved soft matter, DNA from multiple sources where there should be none. Each mummy a crime scene 3,000 years cold. Each scan revealing what burial was meant to hide forever. But the worst discovery came from a worker's tomb. Not a priest, not a noble, just an embalmer who spent 40 years preparing the dead. His burial goods included the tools of his trade, bronze hooks, natron jars, linen rolls, and something else, a wooden box filled with hair, different colors, different textures, each bundle tied with linen thread, each labeled with a name and date. Trophies. The names matched burial records. Young women from noble families, all embalmed at his workshop, all described in records as exceptionally preserved. He'd kept souvenirs, pieces of the dead women he'd touched, his own private collection of conquered flesh. The box held 87 bundles, 87 victims across 4 decades. His journal survived too. Daily records mixed with darker entries. The merchant's daughter arrived this morning. 16 years. Drowned in the canal. Perfect preservation. I told the family 3 days for preparation. She will be ready in 5. The extra days weren't for mummification. The journal details what he did during those stolen hours. How death made them compliant. How cold flesh felt different but not unwelcome. Modern forensics confirmed the journal's claims. Tested mummies showed evidence matching his descriptions. This body violated on the 3rd day. That one repeatedly across a week. Patterns of abuse hidden beneath sacred wrappings. The families had paid him to prepare their daughters for eternity. He'd prepared them for his appetites first. Some embalmers formed guilds, shared techniques, traded corpses. The pretty daughter of a merchant might be exchanged for the young wife of a scribe. Networks of necrophiles operating under religious sanction. After all, the body was just temporary housing. The soul had departed. What happened to empty flesh couldn't matter. The priests said so. But the violations went deeper than individual crimes. The temple of Anubis at Saqqara employed 300 embalmers. Examination of their personal effects revealed systemic participation. Shared tools designed for purposes unrelated to preservation. Group chambers where multiple workers could access the same corpse. Scheduling systems that ensured privacy for special preparations. They even developed preservation techniques specifically for extended access. Partial mummification that left certain areas untreated. Resins that kept flesh pliable longer. Temperature controls that delayed decomposition precisely where they wanted continued use. They turned necrophilia into a science. Wrote manuals. Trained apprentices. Created an industry of the dead. The suicide rates among embalmers exceeded any other profession. Papyri from worker settlements record the numbers. 1 in 5 died by their own hand. Almost always the same method. Drowning in the Nile. The river that dissolved bodies completely. The only water that could wash away what they'd become. They chose drowning for a reason. Egyptian theology taught that those who drowned in the sacred river ceased to exist. No afterlife. No judgment. No eternal punishment. Just dissolution into nothing. These men who'd spent careers violating the dead chose a death that erased their souls. They knew what they deserved, knew where their souls would go if judged, so they chose oblivion. Their suicide notes survive in fragments. I have touched 100 daughters of Egypt after their breath stopped. The dead visit me in dreams. They remember what I did. My hands prepared them for eternity. My flesh condemned us both. Confessions written in the hours before they walked into the river. Final testimonies to crimes that couldn't be punished in life. The families never knew. They buried their daughters believing in sacred preservation. Visited tombs thinking their loved ones rested peacefully. Made offerings to ensure comfort in the afterlife. While underneath those golden masks and painted faces, the evidence of violation slowly mummified into permanence. But even the violated dead had more dignity than what awaited women in the Egyptian afterlife, because the abuse didn't end with death. It intensified. The preparations made during mummification were exactly that. Preparations. The wooden phalluses placed between dead princesses' legs weren't just symbolic, they were instructional. Training tools for an afterlife of eternal sexual servitude. What happened in the embalming houses was just practice for what Egyptian men expected from female souls in the field of reeds. The violation of corpses was nothing compared to the theology of eternal rape that awaited every woman who died in the land of the pharaohs. The pyramid texts spell it out. Annas would possess all women in death. Pepi would penetrate goddesses for eternity. The oldest religious writings in human history read like rape manuals for the afterlife. Carved into tomb walls. Painted on sarcophagi, memorized by children learning to read. Paradise meant endless sexual access to female souls who could never escape, never refuse, never die again to end their torment. The wooden phallus between the princess's legs suddenly made sense. Not a burial mistake, not symbolic fertility. Instructions. This corpse came pre-equipped for eternal use. The ivory one bore hieroglyphs naming which god would wield it first. the afterlife waiting room where violated souls lined up for assignment to divine harems, forever. But paradise for men meant hell for women. The tomb paintings showed it clearly once you knew where to look. Noble men reclining on golden couches while transparent-clad women served them beer, played music, danced with hip scarves that never stopped chiming. The women always smiled in these paintings, always young, always beautiful, always available. The artists painted what Egyptian men expected death to deliver, an eternity of consequence-free flesh. The pyramid texts promised Unas more. He will possess their hearts. He will possess their flesh. He will possess their magic. Not metaphor. The dead king would literally own female souls as property. Use them. Consume them. Regenerate them. To use again. The texts specified regeneration. Women would heal in the afterlife just to be broken repeatedly. Divine technology ensuring endless virginity for endless deflowering. One papyrus from Deir el-Medina preserves a widow's prayer. She begged Osiris for obliteration rather than afterlife. She'd watched her husband beat their daughters. Knew he'd continue for eternity if they met again in the field of reeds. Better to cease existing than endure forever what she'd barely survived for 30 years. The prayer ended with her plan. She would burn her own mummy after death, destroy her body completely, choose nothingness over eternal abuse. Her daughters' letters survived too. They made their own plans, poisoned wrappings, corrupted preservation. Anything to avoid intact arrival in an afterlife where their father waited with theological permission to resume his violations. They'd learned what the pyramid texts promised men. They'd seen the tomb paintings. They knew what paradise meant for women. The books of the dead confirmed their fears. Spell 17 ensured dead men maintained erections. Spell 23 gave them access to any female soul. Spell 45 prevented women from fleeing or hiding. The spells read like an abuser's shopping list. Everything needed to continue domestic violence beyond death. Even transformation spells that let women become birds or snakes included counterspells to force them back into human form for use. High Priestess Henutawi commissioned her own tomb texts. Custom spells. Revolutionary for the Middle Kingdom. She wanted protection in the afterlife. Not from demons or divine judgment, from the male dead. Her tomb walls carried unique inscriptions. Let my soul become fire to burn those who would touch me. Let my essence turn to poison in unwanted mouths. Let my form dissolve before impure hands reach it. 3,000 years ago, a woman used her wealth to buy defensive magic against eternal rape. The priests who carved her spells added their own modifications. Small changes, subtle alterations. Where Henutawi wrote, dissolve, they carved submit. Where she wanted poison, they inscribed honey. They turned her defensive magic into invitation, made her tomb a theological advertisement. Here lies a woman whose own spells ensure compliance. Even rich women couldn't buy safety from scribes who believed female souls existed for male pleasure. The commoner tombs told worse stories. No custom spells, no protective magic. Just standard burial texts that explicitly assigned female souls to divine brothels. The judgment of the dead sorted them. Pure hearts went to agricultural labor. Light hearts became dancers. Heavy hearts fed to Amit. But female hearts had a special category. She who is beautiful went directly to the Palace of Millions, where dead kings collected concubines. Palace of Millions. The texts described it in detail. Infinite rooms. Infinite beds. Infinite women who couldn't die again no matter what happened to them. The dead kings could indulge any appetite, break any body. The women would regenerate by dawn to be broken again. The palace had no exits for female souls, no terms of service, no eventual release. Just room after room of eternal availability. The mastaba tombs at Saqqara preserve one family's tragedy. A merchant buried his wife and 3 daughters together after plague. His burial inscriptions begged the gods to keep them together in the afterlife. Let them find comfort in each other. Let them share their journey. The gods had other plans. The judgment texts assigned each woman to different divine harems. Mother to Ra's solar boat. Eldest daughter to Osiris's palace. Younger daughters to supply the armies of blessed dead. The merchant spent his savings to ensure his family stayed together forever. Egyptian theology scattered them across different rape facilities for eternity. But some women found ways to fight back. Graffiti in worker tombs showed resistance movements, secret symbols, coded warnings. Women teaching each other corruption spells to spoil their own mummies. Ways to make their souls unpalatable to divine appetites. Networks of the desperate sharing whatever wisdom might help them avoid eternal servitude. One symbol appeared repeatedly, a lotus with a broken stem. Archaeologists found it scratched on combs, carved into sandals, painted inside coffin lids where priests wouldn't look. The broken lotus marked women who'd learned the corruption prayers, who'd eaten specific herbs before death, who'd arranged for their bodies to be buried with items that would disrupt resurrection. Small rebellions, probably futile, but the symbols spread through 3 dynasties before priests caught on. The suppression was brutal. Priests declared broken lotus symbols blasphemous. Women caught with them faced live burial. The charge was attempting to deny the gods their rightful property, because that's what female souls were. Property. Divine property promised by the oldest texts, secured by sacred law, delivered through death. The wooden phalluses in royal tombs weren't just instructions, they were delivery notices. This princess, pre-equipped and ready for use, ships to the afterlife with assembly complete. The ivory ones came in different sizes because different gods had different preferences. Some liked them small, some wanted them ribbed. The variety found in female burials resembles nothing so much as a catalogue. Here's what this soul trained for. Here's what she's equipped to handle. Here's the God she's assigned to serve. Modern believers might need to reconsider what they think they know about ancient Egyptian spirituality. The papyrus looked like a grain inventory until scholars realized lotus seekers meant temple recruiters, and the river runs away meant flee immediately. The merchant's wife found it tucked behind oil jars in their storage room. Hieratic script on cheap papyrus, the kind used for shopping lists. But this wasn't recording barley purchases. Someone had risked their life to write these warnings. 3 lotus seekers in the Eastern market today. They watched the water carriers. Simple words that meant run, hide your daughters. The priests were hunting. The code spread through whispered networks. Women at washing stones beat rhythms into wet cloth. 3 strikes meant danger. 5 meant they'd already taken someone. The percussion of resistance echoed across the Nile, village to village, mother to mother, a secret language born from desperation. The scribe who created the first warning codes remains nameless. We know she existed because priests eventually caught her. The trial records describe her crime in outraged detail. She who corrupted sacred communications, spreading false readings of holy signs, teaching mothers to mistake divine summons for common trade. They cut out her tongue before execution, but her codes had already spread beyond their reach. The river runs away meant flee immediately because children who disappeared near water could be blamed on drowning. Parents coached daughters to walk in groups, stay away from canal edges, never help strangers claiming to need directions to the docks. The lotus seekers preferred taking girls near water. Easier to explain vanished children, when the Nile was known for swallowing careless youth. One papyrus preserves a mother's instructions to her 12-year-old daughter. If they call you beautiful, say you have river sickness. If they examine your teeth, bite your cheek until blood flows. If they mention the temple, scream that demons possess you. The letter continues with 17 more tactics. 17 ways a child might escape recruitment through performed madness or manufactured illness. But some families chose more permanent solutions. The blind children appeared first in Memphis, then Thebes, then every major city. Girls with eyes clouded by hot needles, scarred beyond healing. Their parents had made the calculation. Better a blind daughter than a temple whore. Better to maim their children than watch priests destroy them slowly. The mutilations happened at night, performed by desperate mothers who sang lullabies while heating bronze rods. The priests responded with new standards. Blind girls could still serve. Their other senses worked fine. Some clients preferred them, paid extra for women who couldn't see their faces. The recruitment expanded. Now lotus seekers examined girls' hands for steadiness, their skin for smoothness, their voices for pleasantness. Eyes became optional. So parents escalated. Kitchen accidents left faces scarred. Falls from roofs broke limbs that never set properly. Fever diseases struck with suspicious precision, always damaging beauty, always sparing life. The priests knew, everyone knew, but proving intentional mutilation required investigation, and investigators might ask why so many parents chose to destroy their daughters' faces rather than pledge them to divine service. The broken lotus symbol started appearing everywhere, carved into door frames, painted on water jars, sewn into children's clothes where only other mothers would notice. The symbol meant more than resistance. It meant a network, families who'd help hide targeted girls, safe houses between villages, women who knew which herbs caused temporary fever, which prayers might fool inexperienced priests. In Deir el-Medina, archaeologists found a house with 23 broken lotus marks. The family who lived there ran an underground network for 2 generations. They hid girls in grain storage during priest visits. They taught mothers how to fake childhood deaths. They provided the bitter herbs that could spoil a girl's beauty just enough to fail inspection. Their neighbor was a temple scribe. He reported suspicious activity twice. Both times, investigators found nothing. The family had warning codes. The scribe's own wife was part of the network. The resistance developed sophisticated methods: false walls in houses, underground passages between cellars, elderly women who posed as grandmothers to girls fleeing their villages. They created entire false identities, birth records forged, family histories invented, girls who'd been marked for temple service reborn as different people in distant towns. One escape route ran all the way to Nubia. Guides smuggled girls south in grain barges hidden among cargo. The journey took weeks. Many didn't survive. River pirates, desert exposure, disease. But enough made it that Nubian border towns filled with Egyptian refugees. Young women who spoke broken local dialects, who flinched when anyone mentioned temples, who woke screaming from nightmares about golden priests. The temples hired hunters, specialists in tracking escaped property. They followed rumor and gossip, examining every young woman in border towns. They carried lists of distinguishing marks. This escapee had a birthmark on her shoulder. That one was missing a rear tooth. They dragged girls back in chains, examples to others who might consider running. But for every one recaptured, 3 more vanished into Nubian marriages or Ethiopian trade routes. Some girls chose another escape. The suicide herbs grew wild along canal banks. Purple flowers that looked like lotus blossoms but held different promises. A tea brewed from 3 blooms brought sleep. 5 brought forever. Mothers found daughters cold in their beds, purple petals still clinging to their lips. Better dead than defiled. The choice no parent should face, made nightly across Egypt. The priest declared the purple lotus sacred to Set. Possession became punishable by death. But the flowers grew everywhere, and desperate mothers learned to hide their gathering. They dried petals in secret, ground them into powder, kept them in hidden jars marked with grain labels, just in case. Every mother's nightmare contingency, the medicine that meant they'd fail to protect their daughters any other way. But individual resistance met institutional power. The temples had infinite resources, infinite patience. For every family that fought back, 10 more complied through poverty or piety or simple exhaustion. The lotus seekers took their percentages. The temples filled their quotas. The resistance saved hundreds, while thousands vanished into sacred service. Still, they fought. Small victories in an unwinnable war. Messages carved inside temple walls by women who'd learned to write. Tayet lives. Remember her name. Tunnels dug by fathers whose daughters had been taken. Priests found with slit throats, their genitals removed and stuffed in their mouths. The killers were never caught. The broken lotus appeared at every crime scene. One morning, 3 high-ranking priests died in their beds. Their servants found them at dawn. Throats opened, organs missing. The wounds were precise, medical. Someone with anatomical knowledge had removed specific parts while they slept. The parts associated with fertility, with potency, with rape. a ritual killing that mirrored ritual violence. The investigation revealed nothing. The priest's chambers were locked from inside. No signs of struggle. No evidence of outsiders. The temples declared it divine judgment, claiming the priests had somehow offended the gods. But everyone understood the message. Some mother trained in medicine had taken her daughter's price in blood. Some father who knew anatomy had balanced the scales. Some network of the grieving had coordinated triple murder across 3 districts. The killings continued sporadically. Always priests known for violence. Always the same surgical precision. Always the broken lotus left behind. The temples increased security, hired food tasters, posted guards. But the killers adapted. Poison that took days to work, accidents on temple stairs, drownings during ritual baths. Each death perfectly plausible. Each victim carefully chosen. The resistance couldn't win. They knew it. The system was 3,000 years old, woven into the fabric of civilization itself. They could save individual girls. They could kill individual priests. They could maintain their networks and warning codes and purple flowers. But they couldn't stop the machine that consumed their daughters, that built golden monuments on broken hymens, that wrote theology in blood and called it holy. The last coded message we have dates from the Roman period, written on a pottery shard, hidden in a collapsed house. 7 lotus seekers arrived with the new governor, 2 seeking very young. The river has taken my youngest to its far shore. May she find peace where priests cannot follow. A mother announcing her daughter's suicide, her final resistance, her only victory. But individual resistance couldn't stop a system that lasted 3,000 years, a system whose ultimate symbol would be discovered in a tomb marked QV55. Every Egyptian artifact in every museum worldwide, every golden statue, every precious amulet might be stained with the tears of raped children. The British Museum holds 19,000 Egyptian objects. The Louvre displays 8,000. The Met keeps 26,000 pieces behind glass. Tourists snap photos. Scholars write dissertations. Gift shops sell replicas. Nobody mentions the receipts found buried with these treasures. Payment records. Service logs. Flesh traded for gold that now decorates climate-controlled cases. Take the pectoral of Princess Sitha-Thora-Unet, turquoise and carnelian set in gold, one of the finest pieces of Middle Kingdom jewelry ever found. The museum placard notes its exceptional craftsmanship. The audio guide discusses symbolic meanings. Neither mentions the papyrus discovered in the same tomb, a bill of sale. The princess's father commissioned this pectoral using temple revenue from the month of Thoth. That month's ledger shows 412 tokens issued. 412 girls servicing pilgrims to raise funds for royal jewelry. The gold gleams under museum lighting. Visitors admire the intricate inlay work. The princess wore this beauty on her chest while girls her age spread their legs to pay for it. Some were probably her servants, maybe her friends. The gold touched her skin. Their suffering bought its shine. Dr. Sarah Khalil stopped publishing after her 3rd paper. The DNA evidence was too damaging, too clear. She'd tested 17 royal mummies expecting standard dynastic intermarriage. What she found broke academic protocol. Genetic collapse on a civilization-wide scale. The royal bloodlines didn't fade. They imploded. Brother-sister pairings across centuries. Father-daughter unions producing malformed princes. Uncle-niece marriages compounding genetic damage. She documented skeletal abnormalities that shouldn't exist in nature. Cleft palates, clubbed feet, elongated skulls, curved spines, Habsburg jaws 1,000 years before Habsburgs. But the worst discoveries came from infant burials. The tiny mummies in KV64 changed everything. 2 fetuses buried with gold that outweighed their bodies. Daughters of Tutankhamun and his half-sister wife. The CT scans showed why they died. Spinal bifida, hydrocephalus, hearts malformed beyond function. Their DNA was a disaster of doubled genes. Every cell screaming the price of divine purity. Museum displays mention these golden babies. Tour guides discuss burial customs. Nobody explains that incest killed them before they could draw breath. but genetic evidence only hints at the trauma preserved in bone. Dr. Hassan's team in Cairo documented something worse: fracture patterns in female mummies that matched neither accident nor age, pelvic breaks in children too young for childbirth, healed bones showing repeated trauma, compression fractures in spines from weights they shouldn't have carried. These weren't isolated cases. 23% of female mummies showed similar damage. Nearly 1 in 4 Egyptian women died carrying evidence of systemic abuse in their bones. The bones tell stories hieroglyphs tried to hide. This 12-year-old's pelvis shows 3 separate healing patterns: broken, healed, broken again. The final break never mended. She died with it. That 9-year-old's ribs cracked from internal pressure. Not a fall, not disease. Force applied from inside her body outward. The medical term is boring. Penetrative trauma. The reality was a child split open by an adult who claimed divine right. Museums display these mummies as curiosities: Princess of the Two Lands, Royal Wife of the Great House. Titles that sound exotic, powerful. The placards mention their jewelry, their burial goods, their place in dynastic succession. They skip the forensic evidence, the stories written in calcium and collagen, the accusations preserved in bone density scans. Greek writers tried to warn us. Herodotus documented temple prostitution with travelers' curiosity. Strabo mentioned the virgin auctions as cultural color. Diodorus described the sibling marriages with anthropological detachment. They saw the system, recorded it, published their observations for posterity. Modern scholars dismissed them as sensationalists, Orientalist fantasists projecting Greek anxieties onto Egyptian others. The physical evidence proves the Greeks understated the horror. Mesopotamian tablets preserve the spread. Trade routes carried more than goods. Egyptian merchants brought their customs east. Temple prostitution appeared in Babylon within a generation of regular contact. Virgin auctions in Assyrian temples, sacred marriages that destroyed girls. The infection spread wherever Egyptian gold flowed. Other civilizations saw the wealth, wanted the revenue, adopted the methods, created their own theological justifications for systemic rape. The Phoenicians went further, their temples to Astarte filled with sacred women using Egyptian methods. They added innovations, traveling brothels on merchant ships, international flesh trade, justified by theology, girls taken from one kingdom to serve temples in another, cultural exchange, measured in broken hymens. The Phoenician purple dye that colored royal robes across the Mediterranean, partially funded by floating temples where kidnapped girls serviced sailors. Cultural influence outlasted empires. Roman tourists wrote shocked letters home about Egyptian customs that persisted under occupation. They still practice what we have forbidden. Young girls serve in temples. Brothers marry sisters openly. The old gods demand their sacrifices in flesh. Christianity arrived promising salvation. Egyptian converts found familiar patterns. Convents that operated like temple dormitories. Celibate priests with access to cloistered women. New theology. Same violations. Different gods demanding similar service. Modern genetic studies find the echoes. Inbreeding coefficients in mummy DNA that exceed isolated populations. Royal bloodlines that look like genetic bottlenecks. Common populations showing unusual patterns of consanguinity. 3,000 years of normalized incest left signatures in the genome. Egyptian populations carry higher recessive disease rates than neighboring regions. The theological damage persists at the molecular level, but genes and bones only preserve part of the story. The full horror lives in the architecture itself. Temple layouts designed for efficient flesh trade, dormitories positioned for client access, viewing chambers built into ritual spaces, drainage channels in altars, restraint points carved into stone. Archaeologists map these features with growing unease. Form followed function. Function was rape. The engineering precision applied to violation makes pyramids seem like simple projects. Every tour group that marvels at Karnak's hyperstyle hall walks through a crime scene. Those massive columns supported roofs that sheltered atrocity. The sacred lake where priests purified themselves, fed by channels that drained altar blood. The The golden statues of gods, paid for with children's innocence. The hieroglyphs praising divine glory, written by scribes who tracked flesh prices in parallel ledgers. Dr. Khalil found one such ledger in a pottery jar. Late-period accounting. Mundane records, except for the items listed. 7 jars of oil, 12 bushels of barley, 43 lotus tokens, first quality, 16 lotus tokens, seasoned, 9 special orders fulfilled. The numbers tell their story. First quality meant virgins. Seasoned meant experienced. Special orders meant whatever depravity paid extra. All recorded between grain and oil like any other commodity. We know the names of the accountants. The ledgers preserve their signatures. Amenhotep, chief scribe of the Eastern Dormitory. Kaimwaset, keeper of sacred accounts. Ordinary men doing ordinary jobs that happened to involve child trafficking. They went home to families, raised their own daughters, attended festivals, lived normal lives while maintaining rape inventories. The banality of evil dressed in religious authority. The pottery shards from worker villages preserve their humanity. These weren't monsters from myth, just men. They wrote shopping lists, love poems, complaints about supervision, and between mundane concerns, casual mentions of the system. Sent Nefer to collect this month's lotus revenue. The Syrian merchant's daughters arrived for inspection. Thutmose requests the young one from Nubia for tomorrow's ceremony. Evil so normalized it needed no special language. The spread wasn't inevitable. It required infrastructure, investment, international cooperation. Egyptian gold didn't just buy luxury, it bought influence, funded temples in foreign lands, paid for priests who taught Egyptian methods, created demand for services that required Egyptian supply chains. The system replicated because it was profitable. Gods were the excuse. Gold was the reason. Mediterranean cultures that adopted Egyptian practices saw similar genetic collapses. Elite bloodlines in Ptolemaic kingdoms show inbreeding damage. Phoenician royal mummies from Sidon display familiar skeletal abnormalities. The Seleucid dynasty that ruled Syria produced increasingly malformed princes. Egyptian methods created Egyptian outcomes, genetic and social catastrophe dressed as divine tradition. Which brings us back to that tomb in 2005, where archaeologists made a discovery that would finally reveal the full horror of what Egyptian religion did to women even after death. The archaeologist's headlamp cut through darkness again. Valley of the Queens, Tomb 55, later that same day. The team had worked for hours, carefully documenting each artifact's position, but now they'd reached the mummy herself. Time to see who warranted such peculiar burial goods. The limestone dust swirled as they lifted the sarcophagus lid. The princess lay exactly as priests had positioned her 3,000 years ago, but the full scene stopped their breathing. Not 2 phalluses, 5, 2 ivory, 3 wooden, 1 still wrapped in the linen that had covered her genitals, the others positioned at different angles, different penetration points, a rape scene frozen in sacred resin. Dr. Hassan's hands shook as he read the cartouche. Princess Henutmaya, daughter of Ramesses II, sister-wife to her own father. She died at 24 after bearing him at least 4 children. The medical examination would later reveal pelvic fractures consistent with traumatic childbirth, multiple healed breaks, bodies that began breeding too young, often shattered from the inside. But the phalluses were just the beginning. The team found more objects as they documented the burial. A collection of bronze implements shaped like male organs, but ridged, studded, designed to hurt. Leather straps still supple from oils. Wooden frames whose purpose became clear when assembled. Restraint devices, torture implements, all carefully packed for the princess's eternal use. One archaeologist vomited into his dust mask. Another simply sat on the tomb floor, staring at evidence that destroyed everything she'd believed about Egyptian spirituality. This wasn't a tomb. This was a rape kit for the afterlife. Someone priests, embalmers, believers, had ensured Princess Henutmaya would spend eternity exactly as she'd spent life. Violated, penetrated, broken. The inscriptions on the phalluses made it worse. Names of gods. specific gods who would use these specific implements on this specific woman forever. The ivory one bore Osiris's cartouche. The largest wooden one named Min, god of fertility whose permanent erection dominated temple walls. The ridged bronze horror simply read, "For correction, even in death, Henut Maya required discipline." Dr. Hassan ordered the tomb sealed. The team needed time to process what they'd found, but word spread. Other archaeologists reported similar discoveries. Tomb 62 yielded a princess buried with 7 phalluses. Tomb 31 held a queen whose mummy had been positioned with legs spread, wooden implements already inserted. The Valley of the Queens was revealing its secret. These weren't tombs. They were eternal brothels. The findings challenged everything. Museums worldwide held similar objects labeled as fertility symbols or ritual implements. Curators rushed to re-examine their collections. The British Museum found 43 wooden phalluses in storage, all from female burials. The Louvre discovered their ceremonial staffs showed wear patterns consistent with sexual use. The Met quietly removed 16 artifacts from display. But the evidence went deeper than individual tombs. The entire Egyptian concept of paradise enslaved female souls. The Field of Reeds, sold to history as pastoral afterlife, operated as an industrial rape facility. Every spell designed to trap women, every divine mansion built for their containment, every regeneration miracle meant to refresh virginity for endless violation. 3,000 years of theology dedicated to post-mortem sexual abuse. The papyri had warned us. The tomb paintings showed it clearly. We just refused to see. Those scenes of paradise with serving girls, those weren't servants. They were sex slaves who could never die again. Those noble men reclining while women danced, the women couldn't stop dancing. Ever. The beer they poured refilled automatically so service never ended. The smiles painted on their faces mocked whatever their souls actually felt. Modern Egyptologists faced an impossible choice. Admit their entire field glorified systematic atrocity, or continue the cover-up. Most chose silence. Papers went unpublished, tombs resealed. Artifacts returned to storage. The tourism industry depended on Egypt's mystique. Nobody wanted tourists thinking about rape when they photographed the pyramids. But survivors' voices echo across millennia. The graffiti, carved by desperate hands. The coded warnings. The broken lotus symbols. The suicide notes. They told us. We chose not to listen. Preferred our romantic fantasies about ancient wisdom. Our mystical nonsense about pyramid power. Our gift shop mythology that turned systematic horror into coffee table books. The princess in Tomb 55 had been somebody's daughter. Somebody's sister, before she became her father's wife and her god's eternal victim. Her name was Henut Maya. She lived 24 years in a system that broke her body and condemned her soul. The phalluses between her legs were theology made solid, divine truth carved in wood and ivory. The tour guides don't mention the phalluses. The museum placards describe Henut Maya as a beloved royal daughter. The documentaries focus on her jewelry, her beauty, her place in the glorious 19th dynasty. They skip the rape kit for eternity, the theological promise that death brought no escape. The system that turned paradise into punishment for the crime of being born female. Every golden artifact we admire came from this system. Every temple we photograph was built on this foundation. Every tomb painting we analyze shows this horror in plain sight. We just learned not to see it. Trained ourselves to admire the surface, ignore the suffering, appreciate the art while forgetting the artists worked for monsters who thought gang rape was prayer. The Broken Lotus Network saved who they could. Mothers mutilated their daughters out of love. Families chose poverty over temple payments. Some girls escaped to Nubia. Others swallowed purple flowers. Small resistances against infinite horror. They knew they couldn't win. The system was bigger than any network, older than memory, supported by gods and gold and 3,000 years of precedent. But they fought anyway, carved their warnings, shared their codes, killed when they could, saved when they couldn't. The broken lotus bloomed in darkness, fed by tears and watered with blood, a symbol that said some horrors deserve resistance even when resistance is futile. Some systems demand opposition even when opposition means death. Some crimes require witnesses even when witnessing changes nothing. We are those witnesses now, 3,000 years late, standing in climate-controlled museums, admiring golden death masks, reading sanitized placards, buying replica jewelry. The truth hides in basement storage, in unpublished papers, in sealed tombs, in bones that scream their accusations at scholars who measure skulls instead of reading suffering. Princess Henutmaya waits in her tomb, surrounded by instruments of eternal torture. Her car, the eternal soul, trapped in a theological system that makes hell look merciful. The tour buses pass overhead. The gift shops sell papyrus paintings. The hotels promise authentic Egyptian experiences. Nobody mentions the screams built into the architecture, the suffering, funded by tourism, the horror we've agreed to forget. Ancient Egypt gave us mathematics, medicine, architecture, and 30 centuries of systematized rape disguised as religion. The pyramids point to stars, the temples align with solstices, the tombs preserve bodies for eternity, magnificent achievements built on broken children, astounding civilization funded by flesh markets, eternal monuments to humanity's capacity for theological atrocity. This is what separation of sexuality from consent creates. When gods model rape, when priests sanctify abuse, when money flows from suffering, when children become currency, when death offers no escape, when paradise means eternal violation, when resistance seems futile but heroes resist anyway, when mothers choose their daughters' deaths over their daughters' defilement, when broken lotuses bloom in defiance of divine decree. Remember Princess Henutmaya. Remember the wooden phalluses. Remember the broken bones. Remember the resistance networks. Remember the suicide herbs. Remember the coded warnings. Remember the mothers who mutilated their daughters out of love. Remember the girls who chose death over defilement. Remember the priests who paid in blood. Remember that evil this systematic requires systematic opposition. Remember that when we separate human dignity from divine will, we create hells that last forever. And sometimes, forever is exactly how long they last. The princess proves it. Still there, still surrounded by instruments of violation, still waiting for an afterlife that promises nothing but more of the same, forever and ever, world without end. Unless we end it, unless we stop pretending theology excuses atrocity, unless we quit romanticizing cultures that institutionalized horror, unless we admit that golden monuments can be built on innocent blood, that beautiful art can be funded by brutality, that ancient wisdom sometimes means ancient evil, that the past we admire might be a nightmare we've agreed to forget. The archaeologist sealed Tomb 55, knowing what she'd found would challenge everything, would force reconsideration of Egypt's golden legacy, would demand acknowledgement of suffering built into systems we've spent centuries admiring, would require us to see Henutmaya not as ancient royalty, but as eternal victim, would make us witnesses to horror that continues as long as we pretend it was something else. The princess waits in her tomb, the phalluses wait between her legs, the afterlife waits to resume what life began, the tours continue overhead, the gift shops stay open, the lies multiply. And somewhere in the darkness, the broken lotus still blooms, still resists, still whispers its warning across 3,000 years. When sex becomes sacrament without consent, when bodies become theology without humanity, when power claims divine mandate for mortal appetites, we create systems of horror that outlast civilizations, that follow souls into eternity, that turn paradise into punishment. That's what waits in Tomb 55. That's what the wooden phalluses mean. That's what Princess Henutmaya's eternity looks like. That's what 3,000 years of theological rape created. A system so perfect in its horror that even death offered no escape. Only eternal victimization, forever, unless we bear witness, unless we speak truth, unless we remember that some horrors demand acknowledgement, no matter how long they've been hidden. The princess had a name, Henutmaya, daughter of Ramesses, wife to her father, mother to malformed princes, broken by life, condemned in death. She was 14 when it started, 24 when her body finally gave out. forever when the priests prepared her for eternity. Remember her name. Remember what they did. Remember what we've chosen to forget. Remember that evil dressed as sacred becomes no less evil, only more protected, more systematic, more eternal. Remember the broken lotus. It still blooms, still resists, still refuses to accept that some horrors are too big to fight, some systems too old to challenge, some gods too powerful to defy. The mothers who carved it knew they couldn't win. They carved it anyway. The daughters who wore it knew it might not save them. They wore it anyway. The networks that spread it knew the priests would eventually discover their codes. They spread it anyway. Because some things demand resistance regardless of futility. Some horrors require opposition even unto death. Some systems must be fought even when fighting seems impossible. The broken lotus knew this. Bloomed anyway. In darkness, in defiance. In the full knowledge that the system it opposed had gods and gold and 3,000 years of precedent on its side. It bloomed anyway, as we must speak anyway, bear witness anyway, remember anyway, even now, especially now, 3,000 years late but not too late to say. This happened. This was real. This was wrong. This demands acknowledgement. This requires remembering. This insists we see what we've trained ourselves to ignore. Princess Henutmaya was real. Her suffering was real. The system that created her suffering was real. The resistance was real. The broken lotus was real. The horror was real. And it continues to be real as long as we pretend it was something else. As long as we admire the gold without asking who bled for it. As long as we photograph the temples without wondering who served in them. As long as we celebrate the civilization without acknowledging the suffering it celebrated. The princess waits in tomb 55. Forever 14. Forever violated. Forever testament to what happens when human dignity gets sacrificed to divine appetite. She cannot speak, but her bones scream. Her burial goods testify. Her eternity condemns. Listen, look, learn, remember. The broken lotus blooms eternal, fed by tears that never dry, watered by blood that never stops flowing, tended by souls that never stop resisting. Even in the face of forever, even in the grip of gods, even in the silence of tombs, even in the darkness of denial, it blooms, it resists, it remembers, as must we.